The Myles Garrett trade rumors are starting to heat up. Could the Jacksonville Jaguars be interested in trading for the former number one overall pick? We're going to talk about it here on today's show. Welcome into Jags Now, presented by Chat Sports. I am your host, Cullen Brown. And before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts, because we are going to be discussing just the latest surrounding Myles Garrett and could the Cleveland Browns actually look to trade Garrett this offseason, and whether or not the Jaguars should or even be interested, what would it cost, all the, nuts and bolts of everything. But before we get into it, guys, thank you so much for tuning into this video. If you are one of the viewers that was suggested this video through YouTube's algorithm, first of all, thank you for clicking on this video. But we are trying to grow this channel here at Chat Sports. We've got a little over 2,200 subscribers here on the channel, and we provide you with daily Jaguars news and rumors. Whenever the Jaguars make a move or there's something swirling around the team, we make a video here on the channel. So if you could hit that subscribe button to never miss a beat here at Jags Now. Without any further ado, let's get into today's show. Okay, so ESPN kind of did a highlight of the Myles Garrett kind of situation with the contract, and I just kind of wanted to go over the key bullet points and then kind of break down the contract in terms of how I see it, why I don't think it makes sense, and all this, that, and the other. So the Browns and Myles Garrett have modified his contract. So he was set to have bonuses in 2026 through 2028 due on the 15th day of the league year each of those years for 26, 27, and 2028. They are now pushed back to 7 days before the 2026 season is set to start, which you're sitting there wondering, okay, why does that matter? Well, we're going to kind of get into it, but it is noteworthy that those days have been pushed back to, like I said, a week before the season starts. ESPN reportedly framed this as beneficial to both sides, for both Garrett and the Browns. Now, does Myles Garrett maybe get his base salary paid sooner? It's unclear as of current the moment. And the Browns, as far as we know, don't save any salary cap space with this move. It's very puzzling because, again, why would Myles Garrett be potentially interested in benefiting from this move at all? I mean, just to kind of go over some of his bonuses for each of those seasons. You see the numbers on your screen. $29.2 million for 2026, $39.4 million for 2027, $21.4 million for 2028. Those are a significant amount of money for anybody, much less alone an NFL player the caliber of Myles Garrett. And I don't know about you guys at home, but when I've got money coming in, I generally, for the most part, pretty much all the time, want that money as soon as possible. Right? Like if you have a job that pays you every 2 weeks, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, yeah, you can just pay me 6 months down the line for something that, I'm working for currently now. No, that's not how normally things work. And especially for Myles Garrett, like, how does he benefit from the just having his money and his bonuses that he is set to make? Like, those aren't changing. They are going to be paid to Myles Garrett. It's just at a later date. Why would Garrett be benefiting from this? It doesn't make any sense. So ESPN's kind of reporting that it's a mutual beneficial kind of for both parties. I'm struggling to understand it from the Myles Garrett side of things. And I think Spotrac also had a really good tweet in terms of kind of highlighting this from the Garrett and the Browns side of this. The Browns moving back the exercise dates of Myles Garrett's options, bonuses, freed up zero cap space for the Cleveland Browns. So it really didn't even benefit the Cleveland Browns in general. The bonuses are already prorated over 5 years for cap purposes and will remain that way if and when exercised, a.k.a. now a week before the season starts. The move does, however, keep all options on the table. All options, huh? All options. Could a trade be coming for Myles Garrett? That's at least what I'm starting to think of, because when he says all options, they're not going to cut Myles Garrett. I don't see any, restructure. They just signed him to an extension recently. So that would leave really only one option, potentially trading one of the best, if not the best players in the National Football League. Adam Schefter then kind of went on Pat McAfee's show and did kind of more of a breakdown and kind of gave his thoughts in terms of what he was hearing around the league on the Myles Garrett situation, and he had to say the following. A team called me and they're like, hey, did you see this Myles Garrett thing? They're like, if you're shifting option bonuses around, usually there's trade smoke. This is what Schefter was hearing. Right away, I called the Browns. I'm like, what's going on here? They're like, we are 100% definitely not trading him. They were adamant about it. They're like, don't even bring it up and dignify the fact because we're not trading him. They couldn't have been stronger about it. And they're not going to sit there and admit, right, that they're going to look to try to move Myles Garrett because they're trying to maintain the leverage that they have in potentially doing this. Like, if someone can honestly explain it, because we've been talking about it for the last 24-ish hours or so in the office. I've been reading comments based on different, videos around the office. I have yet to find somebody that can explain to me why Myles Garrett would agree to this and why the Cleveland Browns would do this outside of potentially looking to listen to trade offers and potentially trade Garrett. And if you can, let me know down in the comment section below, because I'm honestly stunned. Like, unless the Browns have something cap-wise that we're just unaware of, the only reason that you would push back this money is A, they're getting trade offers and they're listening for them, and B, Myles Garrett's kind of sitting there saying, all right, I'd be potentially open to being traded. So he would agree to this, aka pushing the money down the road, because then now that creates the extra time for teams to potentially look to trading for Garrett. Those bonuses haven't set in, aka, rising the numbers that a team would incur if they were to trade for Myles Garrett. And like I said, it baffles my mind that people are sitting there saying, like, oh, they're believing, Schefter's report at face value that the Cleveland Browns are not going to trade Myles Garrett. Something seems to be fishy here. Something just there doesn't seem to be quite adding up from both the Browns side, Garrett's side, and just the way things are being reported. So keep an eye on this. Now, in terms of what Myles Garrett could be traded for, Brett Coleman, who does a really good job, he's an NFL YouTuber, does a lot of breakdown videos. He's honestly somebody that if you guys do not know who he is, I'd recommend checking him out. He posted this on Twitter here a couple days ago. The asking price for Garrett is 3 first-round picks at least. This is what he's saying. The Browns doing this makes me think they might have a buyer on the line here. I completely agree. Like, in terms of, they have a buyer here. Like, you wouldn't necessarily do this if you are the Cleveland Browns, if you weren't getting calls in some regard, right? Like, the Browns will sit there and, even during the trade deadline last year, it was kind of, swept under the rug a little bit. The Chicago Bears, whenever they traded for Joe Tryon-Shoyinka from the Cleveland Browns, they asked about Myles Garrett, and the Browns quickly shut it down. But this happens all the time with players in the National Football League. Like, teams will call just to ask, be like, hey, listen, is so-and-so available? And usually get shut down pretty quickly, but at least teams are asking, especially if the timelines don't match. If, like, the Cleveland Browns, for example, they're trying to rebuild this roster. They're trying to, build up to a point where they can contend in the future. Myles Garrett, who is at the peak of his powers and he's 30 years old, doesn't really match their timeline. So it's kind of, puzzling from a Cleveland side of this. And don't forget, the Cleveland Browns recently submitted a rule change to allow trading up to picks 5 years out instead of 3. So normally, if you're sitting there trying to make a trade for a player, like let's say you want to make a trade for a quarterback, for example, like if, for a team, for example, let's say like the Minnesota Vikings before they signed Kyler Murray, if they were wanting to trade for a guy like Joe Burrow, they could only trade up to 3 first-round picks to the Cincinnati Bengals in order to get a Joe Burrow. Well, now the Browns, whenever they made this rule, people were kind of sitting there saying, oh, wow, are the Cleveland Browns potentially going to offer an insane amount of picks for a player to add to this roster to try to, compete right away? That was the initial reaction. But no one really kind of considered the fact that maybe they were, submitting these rule changes to the possibility that if they trade Myles Garrett, could they potentially get draft capital way down in the future, right? Because the Cleveland Browns have 2 first-round picks this year. Could they maybe potentially want 3 first-round picks for 27, 28, and 29? Maybe even further down the line? It's kind of an interesting proposition. And for those of you who are sitting there about the 3 first-round picks, we'll kind of get into where I value Myles Garrett and what I would be willing to give up later in the show. But we just saw a trade that did not go down with the Baltimore Ravens and the Las Vegas Raiders. But it was agreed to, at least initially, for 2 first-round picks for Max Crosby. And listen, Max Crosby is one of the best edge rushers in all of football. I still think, even though coming off the injury that he suffered last season, he's still a top 5 to 7-ish edge in the league and somebody that can change the course of a franchise. That being said, he is no Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett, who, like I said, he's coming off a season where he just turned 30 years old, 23 sacks, broke the sack record, 33 tackles for loss, 39 quarterback hits. In terms of non-quarterbacks, there's not many players out there that could command more in a trade. I mean, could a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase level player as a wide receiver maybe command more? I mean, they're young. They're obviously really talented skill players. Could a Will Anderson Jr., right, given his age and his talent, maybe command more in a trade? Like I mentioned kind of earlier in the video, you could make the argument that in terms of just a pure football player, there is nobody in the sport that could compare to a Myles Garrett. The question is, and why we're kind of sitting here talking about it on a Jags Now video, is how much should the Jaguars potentially give up, and would the Jaguars even be interested? Because I know people are sitting there commenting, like, why would the Jaguars be interested? Why is this even a video? Why are we even talking about this? Well, if you remember during the Max Crosby trade saga, Diana Rossini had this note whenever Max Crosby was initially traded from the Las Vegas Raiders to the Baltimore Ravens, saying this line, kind of right here in the middle. The Jacksonville Jaguars were another team trying to put together a big trade package that would get it done. Now, it was ultimately reported that the Jaguars, they made the calls, but they weren't quite all the way interested, as Diana Rossini was alluded to. Ryan O'Halloran kind of had some good reporting in that end. But I'll say this much. If the Cleveland Browns are taking calls on Myles Garrett and are listening and are sitting there saying, hey, we're potentially looking to trade a generational defensive player, you at least have to get on the phone and see what the price is. I'm not saying you have to make the trade. I'm not saying you have to, bend heaven and earth to acquire Myles Garrett, but you at least need to make the phone call. You at least need to see what could potentially be in terms of a trade. And we obviously know the Jaguars and Browns have had trade history. Just in James Gladstone's short time, right? Like, they traded for Travis Hunter in that infamous draft day trade. And Gladstone's not afraid to wheel and deal. The Greg Newsome trade, the Jacoby Myers trade. Like, he is not afraid to make deals and be aggressive. So I could understand James Gladstone at least being one of those teams that if the Cleveland Browns are taking calls on Myles Garrett, they're at least one of them that are like, hey, how much is it? How much would it be? But in reference to Brett Coleman's tweet, which I do think it would be somewhere around that in terms of an asking price, I'm not giving up 3 first-round picks. And I respect that Myles Garrett and the player that he is and, anybody that would sit there and ask for that amount of draft capital given where the kind of trade packages kind of are going. I mean, like I said, we saw what Max Crosby went for. And I just think that if you're Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns, you should be asking for 3 first-round picks. And I kind of was sitting there in the office and I thought about, okay, if the Jaguars, if I was James Gladstone and I was trying to get Myles Garrett and Cleveland was willing to play ball and we were negotiating, what would my final trade offer be? Last case, this would be take it or leave it. Either you accept this offer or we're walking away. This is the trade that I came up with. Myles Garrett heads to Duval County in exchange for 2 first-round picks in 2027 and 2028. You would send them Trayvon Walker, who fits their kind of timeline more so than Myles Garrett does. So a quality edge and a 2027 third-round pick. I think that's a pretty fair offer. And it would be a strong offer that I think Cleveland would get for Myles Garrett. Would it get it done? I'm not sure. Maybe not. Probably not. But that would be my offer. That would be the absolute most. You obviously wouldn't start at this trade offer, but that would be my final offer. So that's kind of the conclusion that I came to. And we'll see kind of if this, picks up any steam as we get closer to the draft, maybe throughout the offseason. Does this start to pick up a little bit, or was this all smoke? I mean, it could be something where the Cleveland Browns and everything maybe are just, not looking to trade Myles Garrett. But again, the way they just kind of went about these things, it's got me a little confused. I'll be honest. Now, I want you guys to be James Gladstone in the comment section. What would your trade for Myles Garrett, what would your offer be? I gave you mine. Again, final case, the most you would give up. Let me know down in the comment section below. I'm going to make sure I respond to everybody who sends in their trade offers down below in the comment section. So I want to hear from you guys. Get down below and let me know how much you would trade for Myles Garrett. And that's going to be the end of today's Jags Now episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, make sure, again, you hit that subscribe button. Give us a like. We greatly appreciate it. We're trying to grow this community here at Jags Now. Until next time, guys, we'll see you on the next one. Peace out.